Make sure to give my dad a 5-star review.
Make sure to like and subscribe to his YouTube. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Idea that the war is waged in the heavenlies, they would say, against principalities and powers. But the effects of that war are seen and are very tangible right here on earth, right? So maybe different policy positions, different people winning elections. They will say that the war is occurring, the battle is occurring in the spiritual realm. The effects of it seen in the natural, what they would call the natural world.
Then we'll introduce ourselves like, hey, welcome to Faithful Politics. Welcome back to Faithful Politics, actually. I'm your political host, Will Wright, joined by your political host, who are you again? You're the faithful.
I'm a faithful.
Pastor.
I'm the guy with the woke mind virus, dude.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, you do have that woke mind virus. Anyways, you're Pastor Josh Bertram.
I am.
I'm all right. This is Faithful Politics. We got off on a really weird start. But joining us today,
that's what makes this interesting.
Karrie, oh, dang it.
Gaspard Hogewood.
No, let me say it. Oh, I wanted to say it. I was going to say
Hogewood. Gaspard Hogewood.
It's the E. The E throws everybody off.
It really does.
Silent E.
Yeah, well, we are so to have you. We're so glad to have you on our show. You are a licensed social worker, a PhD student at Tulane University, and your research focuses on religion, politics, and social movements. You also explore faith traditions that shape political engagements, collective identity, and even spiritual warfare. And this is just a really, really strange start to the beginning of an episode. So I'm just going to stop there and just say welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I have been super pumped about this all week. So
thank you so much.
I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. And so where are you calling us from?
New Orleans, where it is always hot and the potholes are deep. Yes.
Very, very nice. Well, yeah, so you are currently in the middle of writing a dissertation. This is kind of like your field of interest, of passion, religion, politics, social movements, but it wasn't always. And I'm curious, why don't we just start off by just help us walk through a day in the life or years of Karrie, and how did you kind of get to the point today where, now you're writing, like, I don't know how many pages your dissertation is going to be, but a lot more than probably I've ever written. So how'd you get to this point?
Probably a lot more than I would care to write. But yeah, so I kind of had a weird educational route. I do have a master's in sociology. Thought I wanted to do grad school, wasn't sure. Went back to grad school to get a master's in social work, figured out, no, I really do need the PhD. And so now I'm working on the PhD in sociology at Tulane University. So I was always interested in religion and kind of religion as a social institution, both the good and the bad of it. And so that kind of has brought me to Christian nationalism broadly. Admittedly, I wasn't quite sure if that was going to be my area of expertise or not. It seemed like a lot of people were in that conversation. And then January 6th happened. And I grew up Christian. I saw a lot of symbols and imagery and language that I recognized that day. And there was a lot of stuff I didn't recognize. And so that kept bothering me. I wanted to know more. And so that brought me to studying a particular strand of Christian nationalism. It's the neo-charismatic kind of strand. Sometimes folks refer to it as NAR, the New Apostolic Reformation. But either way, it's a charismatic expression of Christian nationalism. My ring.
That's
and so it had a lot to do with not only January 6th, but then the movement to stop the steal after, and just a continuation of kind of this messianic status of Trump and kind of the divine calling or anointing that he has for the country. And so, yeah, that's how I got here.
I appreciate you sharing that. It's really cool to hear people's stories and to get more context. And I'm interested. So you grew up Christian. You don't have to share anything you're not comfortable with, but could you elaborate on that a little bit? What do you mean? Like what denomination? Like what was that like?
So
for you?
Southern Baptist, Louisiana, is how I grew up. I kind of had a period there where I didn't go to church, still read the Bible, did all that, but was kind of not sure about organized religion. And then
Me neither.
and then I married a pastor. So here we are.
And there you go, dude.
So yes, so that it's funny how things turn out. Most definitely.
Yeah, I absolutely understand that. And I say that tongue in cheek about me not being sure about organized religion, but it's kind of true. It's like it just depends on how those institutions go and what kind of methods they use. And I know that's what you've been working through. And I would love to kind of get a sense of, for our audience, what's the main thesis of your dissertation? If you could describe, like, what were you setting out? Like, what are you trying to prove essentially? And we want to we love talking about the substance stuff on this podcast. It is a little deep sometimes. We try to lighten it, but we do want to make sure people are understanding how people think, what's really going on, so that they're not making caricatures and they're really dealing with the substance of what you're saying.
Right.
And so what's the thesis of the dissertation in a way that you think our general audience can understand?
Sure. So basically, I come at it from a social movements perspective, right? And so what ideas, what type of rhetoric is mobilizing? Whether that is voting or violence or whatever, mobilization in any sort of way. So my dissertation is looking specifically at spiritual warfare rhetoric. And really looking at the idea of framing. So in social movement scholarship, there are different types of framing, diagnostic, prognostic, and motivational. And so I'm looking at all that breaks down to the gist is I look at how the enemy is constructed. So who are they saying is the enemy, right? And then in order to do spiritual warfare against, and then how are they framing this idea of spiritual warfare? What are they saying to do about the threat of the enemy? And then the last piece is looking at, are those ideas actually mobilizing? Do they spur political engagement? Whether that's, putting a sign in your front yard or voting a certain way or running for school board, whatever it is, right? And so I really kind of want to look at that whole piece from spiritual warfare rhetoric. Who is the enemy? What's being said to be, done about it? And why should people do anything about it, right? What are those motivational elements? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's so fascinating because so I didn't grow up Christian. I came to the faith 2008-ish. And I've heard the term spiritual warfare and before I was a Christian and just thought it was that's crazy talk. Like those believers and their imaginary God and blah, blah, blah. And when I became a Christian and I had a sort of better understanding of it, to be honest, it still doesn't really quite make sense to me. So could you just sort of unpack, when we're talking about spiritual warfare, the image in my head are a bunch of people riding on winged horses with swords, about to attack each other or something like that. So what is spiritual warfare?
So spiritual warfare is, it's different, obviously, for different groups, right? Some folks believe in more individual spiritual warfare. Others, like NAR types, believe in a strategic level spiritual warfare in addition to kind of that individual level. So spiritual warfare is essentially it's war, right? In the spirit realm. It is the forces of good versus the forces of evil, right? And so there are different types of ways to engage in spiritual warfare. It might be worship. Is a form of spiritual warfare. Prayer is a form of spiritual warfare. I've seen flag dancing in these charismatic environments. That is a form of spiritual warfare. So it can take many different shapes. The focus of my dissertation is going to be on spiritual warfare prayer specifically. But the language of spiritual warfare is inherently kind of this binary, good versus evil. For example, so NAR or neo-charismatic types believe in 3 different levels of spiritual war. So you have the individual level, and that can be anything from, a heart condition, an addiction. They would even classify, if you identify as LGBTQ, that you are infested with a particular demon that is controlling these aspects of you, gout from, cancer to anything, right? And so they'll essentially do this spiritual warfare prayer and practice to rid the individual of those demonic entities. There's an occult level spiritual warfare. It's kind of the meso level that, you can pray against different religions, right? Different occult practices. The Masons are often a target of these.
But doesn't everyone kind of feel like the Masons? I mean, except for Masons, doesn't everyone kind of feel like they're crazy? Because you're like, what is this Masonic temple? And why is it a temple? And Masonic just sounds like messianic. And so it sounds, I mean, am I off on this one? I mean, I just feel like, I don't know. Sorry, I interrupted. But the Masons, I'm just like, the Masons, like what? And actually, interestingly enough, in the Assemblies of God, which I was a part of, maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe I should. Maybe I don't know. But I love the Assemblies. They've done so much for me. And even though I can critique parts, I love it. But anyway, one of the things that you have to do is say that you're not going to be in one of these like secret societies to be a minister. Like you can't belong to both. So it's like, what's up with that?
Right?
Like, what's going on? It's a conspiracy, man. Something's happening. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
The Masons get the wrath of many people. Yes, it's they have been a target for sure. So yes, that would be the occult level, right? Of different religious symbols, practices, things like that. Feminism, maybe, different ideas like that. But then what's very unique to these neo-charismatic types that, some might classify as NAR, which that's just a whole kind of loose network, right? There's no like membership, is this idea of strategic level spiritual warfare, where entire cultures or geographic spaces or institutions are believed to be under kind of the kingdom of Satan and need to be won back, right, for the kingdom of God. And you can do that through spiritual warfare practices, namely prayer and worship. And so what's really interesting about that is it's this idea that the war is waged in the heavenlies, they would say, against principalities and powers. But the effects of that war are seen and are very tangible right here on earth, right? So maybe different policy positions, different people winning elections and that sort of thing, right? So that's what is extremely interesting to me about this movement is that while they will say that the war is occurring, the battle is occurring in the spiritual realm, the effects of it are intended to be seen in the natural, what they would call the natural world.
So like when there's like a major hurricane or tornado or some sort of like natural disaster, there are some that would attribute that tragedy to God's feeling on a particular issue. Would that sort of like fit kind of in the realm of what you're describing?
Yeah, I mean, for that, the way I've heard it phrased in terms of like natural disasters, it's more kind of God's wrath on a people for believing a certain way or behaving a certain way. So that would be more, I think, at least in how I've heard it, of more of a punishment, the wrath of God against his believers or against people who don't believe, right? And so spiritual warfare is more the active need to pray against particular demonic entities in order for God's people and God's will to inhabit the earth, really. So it's also a very embodied practice, that's why it worries me in terms of violence, because I think this rhetoric has spiritual warfare has always existed, but I think that the rhetoric surrounding it and the engagement with the political sphere has really ramped up stuff. And I worry about kind of the violence. And so, a lot of this is, the goal is political change in the natural world. You also see things, spiritual warfare practices like Jericho marches, right? And you saw a lot of these before January 6th, folks walking around maybe the Supreme Court and praying against the demonic forces that guide the justices within it.
Karrie, real fast, can you just describe, just for our audience that may not be familiar, so a Jericho march is based on something in the Bible, right? So can you just talk, why are a bunch of people marching around, blowing horns and stuff like that around the Capitol?
Right. And so this is the idea, taking from the biblical story, that if, you march around somewhere 7 times and blow the shofar and pray, the walls will come down, and all of the bad people inside will, in the biblical story, is quite violent, will be slaughtered, right? Men, women, children, animals, and allow for God's people to take control and to reign. So that's the gist. That's the idea. I mean, the idea is violent, right? And then that it's such an embodied practice that folks do is concerning to me, in addition to the rhetoric and ideas like the 7 Mountain Mandate that I know that you've talked about before on your show. But I worry about kind of what this rhetoric does to people and how it mobilizes people.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that a lot, because I think about if you have a group of people who are they all alike think that this demonic thing is going to create real results, right? The spiritual it's not like the spiritual is unreal. That's not what I mean. And I don't actually think that. I think it's very real. But that they would say somehow there's this connection that's not only direct, but that is influenceable by them, right? That gives them there's some kind of connection between, I'm going to say that I'm going to march around this thing physically, I'm going to blow this shofar physically, and I'm going to I'm going to then pray and shout or speak in tongues or whatever it is, all those number of things. And those actions have direct causal relationships to heavenly realities that then have direct causal relationships to the earth, right?
Correct.
But that's not as much of an issue, because there's a lot of people that believe that. But it's more that they would then think that, no, I need to go beyond this and do what? Physically harm someone? I mean,
Yeah.
Obviously that's awful. And that's we don't want that we have political violence is a scourge on our society. And so, but is that the concern?
That's the concern for me. I mean, you take ideas like the Great Replacement theory idea that has, really motivated different mass shooters, right? I mean, ideas can motivate people to violence. And so, to your point I think spiritual warfare has always existed, right? And some in denominations, right? Like with Assemblies of God and things like that. And I'm thinking back, also just hymns that we used to sing in church about onward Christian soldiers, right? And all this battle imagery. there was a song that I learned in vacation Bible school about the Lord's army, something about like, I won't ever.
I'm in the Lord's army.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir.
Exactly.
I may never march in the infantry. Ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery.
The artillery.
I may never
yes.
fly over the enemy.
Yes.
But I'm in the Lord's army.
Right?
Oh, yeah,
right?
we sing that all the time.
Yeah, right? And so you have...
Am I a Christian nationalist, Will?
No.
Is that...
That is not it. Yeah, it's interesting because, and you have like, what's the verse from Ephesians about putting on the armor of God. I mean, these have existed, right, for a really long time. I think that right now there's a shift. There has been a shift in my lifetime from, at least when I was presented with these things, they were presented in terms of kind of the need for discipleship, right? The need to go out and to make disciples among men, and
yes.
And to which was also tied into kind of this particular eschatology, right? Of this end times understanding that there will be a rapture, and the people who are saved are going to go to heaven, and the people that aren't are going to go to hell or spend quite a while during this time of tribulation. And so you want to go out and be a disciple, right? You want to win people for Jesus. You're concerned about soul saving, right? And so to me, growing up, that was always in the context of like spiritual battle, right? That was always presented kind of more in that way, in the discipleship. Not to say that, political entities didn't also use that for colonization purposes and those, but I'm talking about like people in the pews, right? Understanding the idea of we need to go out and make these disciples and win people for the Lord, right? There's been a shift from discipleship now to domination, and so that is in my increasing concern with violence comes in part from that. So no longer is it go disciple folks, it's go dominate folks. And you see this idea in the increasingly popular idea of the Seven Mountain Mandate, which essentially is a dominionist idea or dominion theology that's really derived from a particular reading of Genesis that says, man should take dominion over the earth and everything in it. And so if you're not familiar with the Seven Mountain Mandate, I know you guys are, but if your listeners are not, this is just the belief that God has mandated that Christians climb atop and rule over the different mountains of culture. So things like education, arts and entertainment, media, government, the family, religion even. And so all of that, that idea is growing. I know Paul Jupe has shown kind of the increase in agreement with the Seven Mountain Mandate. And when you believe that, right, and then you also throw in the spiritual warfare aspect of good versus evil, there's no talking, there's no compromise. You don't compromise with a demon, right? You get rid of a demon. And so it goes from discipleship to trying to like befriend people and win them over for Christ and let them, know the Lord that and all of that, to by any means necessary, essentially Christians, and a specific type of Christian, I would add, need to stand atop the mountains of culture. And this also like the discipleship one, I think is kind of really, driven by kind of another type of eschatology, being the post-millennial dominionism, right? So essentially, instead of the rapture happening, it's a if you build it, he will come idea, right? You need to actually create the kingdom of God on earth before Christ's return and reign. And so that necessitates political engagement, right? And you need to, whether it's vote a certain way or pray a certain way, you need to be engaged politically to make sure that those political shifts happen so that the kingdom of God can be realized. And that's that's quite different than discipleship.
That's a lot, and it's a lot to just absorb. And I'm always careful about when we talk about stuff that could be theologically or politically dense, to just sort of like take a step back a second, because if this is the first time somebody's tuned into our episode, they're like, "What did she just say? It sounds scary," So, like, can you just kind of explain, like, how do we even get here, like, to this point? Again, like, I came to the faith in 2008. Had I talked to you, or had we had this conversation before then, I would have been like, no, thank you. Like this sounds way too complicated. Like, I don't know what the secret handshake is, and I just want to make sure that I go to heaven, and so, like, how do we get here? Feel free to kind of just, start at whatever point, whether you want to start at, Rushdoony, or you want to start, with like the religious right. Like, we're at a point today in our Christian faith where there seems to be a lot of different rivers and streams coming off this ocean. So, yeah, just tell me what you think.
Yeah, I mean, all of this since, day one of the U.S. has been building in a certain way, right? And, we have denominations that come and split, and, it's just a kind of an ongoing evolution, right? You mentioned Rushdoony. Christian nationalism generally, I think, when we're talking about that broadly, we're talking about different groups. It tends to be discussed in survey data, which has been extremely helpful in understanding like a lot of the worldview and ideology of this group as a whole. There are different strands, right? So you have kind of the Christian Reconstructionist movement, that you think Rushdoony, you think Doug Wilson, right? That is more interested in Old Testament, like biblical law being enacted in our government, and also very attuned to specific gender norms, gender roles, right? The hierarchy of the family kind of thing. You've got the Christian identity movement that I would house under this Christian nationalist umbrella, that is very motivated by race, and believing that, only white men should be in charge of things, right? And so while they all have these kind of ideas of dominion, right, or dominion theology, who or what is at the helm, and what that looks like looks different. And then you have kind of your moral majorities, kind of your non-charismatic Christian right, that's kind of how I distinguished them, and then kind of the charismatic Christian right. And so all of these kind of have come together historically, and have grown and shifted and merged in these really curious ways, right? That right now, I think a lot of these groups are have very similar goals, and so they're supportive of each other. And these aren't, I mean, academically we have to kind of have our little categories, but obviously in reality there's lots of leeway and in terms of boundaries and identification. So all of that to say that I think as these different strands are growing and becoming more politically engaged, and social media has done, just media in general has done a lot of work for this, for these efforts, in terms of, I'm thinking like prosperity gospel pastors and stuff that are more charismatic and would maybe lean toward NAR ideas. There's just been different ways to mobilize and easier ways to mobilize. And I think that we're seeing kind of the kind of confluence of that now. So for decades, we know the non-Christian right, the non-charismatic Christian right has worked diligently, very well financed, very well organized, right, to be able to influence policy. I'm thinking of groups like the Council for National Policy, Family Research Council, which has different state affiliates in Louisiana. I think it's the Louisiana Family Forum, that do a lot of like legislative work and lobbying. And so you have all of that. And then as far as the charismatic expressions, it's kind of twofold. This charismatic religion is the fastest growing globally, right? So you kind of have an increase in adherence, but at the same time, you have Paula White Cain, who is Donald Trump's spiritual advisor has been for years. And she is not from a mainline denomination, right? She knows more prosperity pastors and televangelists and charismatic folks who, have these big media empires. And so, when Donald Trump wants to court the evangelical vote, he goes to who he knows, and she goes to who she knows, right? And then before long, you have a lot of these folks who believe in these demonic entities, who participate in spiritual warfare practices, who have these kind of narratives about the country, in positions of power that have the president's ear. And so, I don't think I feel like I wasn't very clear on this answer, but it's a host of things that have just kind of come together in this perfect storm at this time.
I mean, I'm just like taking it in, and it's producing all sorts of like interesting ideas and questions in my mind. And one of the things is like, I would love for you, let me make sure I understand. All right. Just so let me make sure I understand for myself and for our audience. I like to play dumb sometimes so that I can, not that our audience is dumb, and I don't know where I'm going with this, except to say I like to simplify it because I want to make sure that people are understanding, and that from a broad view. Anyway, maybe we mark that and edit it out because that was kind of a weird way to say that. Never. Okay. Whatever. But here is my actual question, making sure I understand. So if we're thinking about strategic spiritual warfare, because this is really the issue, right? I mean, people think about occult issues, but it's not that it isn't important, but it's not exactly the headlines of like, hey, gotta figure out this occult stuff. What's happening right now is the strategic spiritual warfare that seems to be now actually being manifested politically in certain ways. And I think that's the fear. Whether it is, whether it isn't, that can be argued, right? That's what we're doing, but that might be part of the fear. And what is taught those at the strategic level, that they're territorial spirits. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. They would call them principalities and powers. So that is a biblical term. I do know that. They influence regions and institutions. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So, and that Christians can map them and confront them. Okay. And that is through like what? How do they do that exactly? Like the chauffeur or that kind of stuff? Or...
There's a thing called demon mapping that they'll use this kind of gift of discernment.
Like demon hunter? Like K-pop demon hunter style?
So what happens...
Wait, sorry. One second, Karrie. Have you seen that movie?
I have not.
You should watch it.
Over.
But if you start talking about the Han Moon, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to freak out. Anyway.
I don't know what you're talking about. I clearly...
Right, thank God. Okay, then please proceed.
I need to have more cultural references. Yes.
All right. Well, hold on. Like, I don't want this elephant to be in the room. So K-pop Demon Hunter is like a Netflix hit sensation.
Yes,
they produce amazing
that my kids
songs
love.
like Soda Pop, Takedown, Golden. It's a Korean singing group that has to use their voice to cast the demons away.
Okay.
And the music is nothing short of like, I don't know, cultish. Like I can't get the songs out of my head.
Yeah, they really are like, I kid you not, I have heard the theory that they are in fact devil worshipers, and they've sold their soul to Satan. That demonic influence is everywhere in that, which is probably a lot of what we're talking about, right? That demonic influence is there. They've sold their soul to Satan, and that's why their music is so good. Which that's a pretty old tale, though. Isn't that like Faust or something? Like, that whole idea, I'm selling
Robert
my
Johnson.
soul. And
Sell your soul to the devil. I think there was a song
exactly.
about that.
Absolutely. But I guess what I want to make sure, and this is like, like overlapping a lot. It's really an ideology and belief of NAR, Seven Mountains, all of that. And so I guess I would love for you to talk a little bit more about this demon mapping. I know I kind of like, yeah, I interrupted you and said that, but talk about the demon mapping and what are we talking about when they're talking about spiritual mapping, strongholds, demon, all that stuff? What's going on? And then again, I guess bringing it back to why should we be concerned? Not why should we care? Because I think there's a lot of reasons to care about it.
Right.
But why should we be concerned, or should we be concerned?
Yeah. I'm gonna have to watch this K-pop Demon Hunter. It sounds very similar to what Sean Foyt's doing in terms of going, his kingdom
that's
to the
totally
capital.
true.
Well, going from the kingdom to the capital tour, right? That was going and using worship to push back against kind of these demonic strongholds in these capital cities that are typically democratic, that are typically blue, right? And so it's essentially the same concept. So maybe they owe Sean Foyt some of their royalties. I don't know. He would probably like that. So it sounds very.
Dude, I was saying Sean Foyt, the original K-pop Demon Hunter.
Yeah, the original K-pop Demon Hunter.
Dude,
Yeah,
that's gold.
right. Yeah. So Sean Foyt once called me the woke two-lane lady, so he can thank me for that. Yeah, just line in your pockets more, Sean. So yes. Yes. Anyway, so I like this question though, because it has to do, let me tackle demon hunting or demon mapping first. It is believed that you can go around a city and apparently, though, and I've never seen this done, read about it, apparently we'll look up different, just historical facts. Like maybe there was a slave trade on this corner, right? Which is awful and demonic. Maybe there was
Agreed.
right? Yeah. And maybe there was a massacre of, I don't know, orphans. I'm just making all this up, right? But they'll look at the historic documents and say, well, here are the points, right, of really demonic activity and demonic strongholds. And then they will have someone come in that is apostle, a prophet, somebody with the spirit of like discernment that can discern what type of demon, what the name of the demon is, that they're dealing with, so that they can then actively pray against it. Right. And so that is, that's the gist of demon mapping and spiritual warfare in that way. I think it's fascinating, the strategic level spiritual warfare, and it ties very, very well into the American story and other narratives in Christian nationalism dealing with land. And the belief is, you have a host of folks on the Christian right. I'm thinking like Rick Green, pseudo historian. What's his name? David. Oh, poot. I know
who you're talking about.
Barton. Yes, thank you. Who promote a particular historical narrative, right? And essentially the gist of it is not only was the America or the U.S. founded as a Christian nation, but that in doing so, it kind of, and it being its inhabitants as well, entered into this covenant relationship with God, right? And so as long as you are a good Christian and you are putting forth policies and politicians that are promoting the values that God likes, the nation of the U.S. will be blessed, right? If it is not blessed, then we're not in God's divine favor, and then all hell breaks loose, right? And so the strategic level spiritual warfare kind of goes hand in hand with that particular narrative of America's founding, because it then adds a different layer onto it, saying, well, not only is the land holy, right, and it has entered into this covenant with God that we need to maintain in order to maintain blessing, but it's actually the site of a spiritual battle between the forces of good and the forces of evil that is ongoing, and that we need to reclaim that for Christ. And so it's a very interesting convergence, I think, of these two ideas of the origin of America and of strategic level spiritual warfare. Prayer calls, for example, that I'm looking at really speak to there's the group that I'm looking at. There's a host of prayer calls, all over the internet, hosted by various people, apostles, prophets, intercessors, state level, federal level. It runs the gamut. But the ones I'm looking at go to or speak on each state, and they talk about the divine authority of each state and the for example, I think Alabama was termed the justice state, and the justice angel fights over that state. And so it's the places have meaning, right? Places have meaning beyond just that covenantal relationship, but places have meaning because they're inhabited by spiritual forces. And if they're not inhabited by godly ones, then by default, they're inhabited by demonic ones. And so spiritual warfare comes back into this by the need for people to undergo spiritual warfare practices or to engage in spiritual warfare practices to rid these spaces of the demonic entities. So you'll often hear things like people need to stand in the gap. You might have people speak about the ecclesia, or God's kind of ruling body.
Karrie, can I interrupt you just for a second?
Sure.
Yeah, sorry, but I just wanted to make sure that, like, one thing you mentioned that Barton was a pseudo historian, and I would love for, like, because one thing is that we want more MAGA listeners, believe it or not. Like, we want people from a lot of different sides that are listening and engaging. And even people that are Christian nationalists, like, we actually want you to listen. We'd love for you to be a part of this conversation with us and really, like, moving towards a reasoned place and a shared future. That's what we really want. But so I understand what you mean when you say that, I think, but I'd love for you to bring some more clarity, if you would, and then kind of, if you can bounce back into, like, the issue there. I know we were talking about demon mapping, but just to make sure, like, just to take an aside, and what is it about David Barton? Like, what's going on there? Why would he be labeled a pseudo historian? What does that mean?
So I often, I feel like every time I see his name in print, that's what precedes it, is pseudo historian. And the reason for that is because he promotes a particular narrative about America and America's founding, and that being a Christian nation for Christians, which doesn't necessarily jive with the separation of church and state, right? That we have come to rely on, and so it is different. I think that he's referred to that or as that in different spaces because a lot of what he says isn't historically verifiable. And that it really just promotes this idea that is false, that the idea of America as a Christian nation, and that it was founded and meant to be a Christian nation, he elevates that narrative, which is historically, from my understanding, inaccurate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. No, I appreciate it. I mean, the reason I bring it up is I really, really, really want to be as fair as I can.
Yeah.
And and Will and I, we've talked a lot about this, like this idea of the elephant and the rider. Like, Will and I are becoming big Jonathan Haidt fanboys. So Jonathan, we'd love to have you on the show. If you ever see this, man, please, we'd just love to talk to you. But the idea of elephant and rider, and like, that we, just by nature of our relationships, by nature of the people we know, the things we read, we're going to, like, just have feelings about what someone says.
Right.
Good or bad, that have nothing to do necessarily with a conscious understanding. I always get those back and forth. A conscious understanding of the evidence or why or the rationality. And what I'm always trying to remind myself is, I don't want to just I don't want to say, that guy is a pseudo historian because I don't like what he's saying.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Because it makes me feel weird or I don't like it. or it signals
Absolutely.
bad in my mind.
Yeah.
I actually want to know why and wrestle with those arguments. And I'm not saying you haven't or don't, or should have. I'm not even sure that's your area, of specialties to work with that. But I think I not only does it help our audience know how I kind of think and how Will and I have talked, but I think it helps the people that come on and I would love to hear your thoughts if you have any on it. But I just wanted to bring that.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And yes, I mean, we're not getting through this current polarization without dialogue, right? Like that's just not going to happen. So I appreciate the opportunity to clarify and to add some more points on that. We as Americans have kind of shot ourselves in the foot in terms of things that we've implemented and made happen that would be considered maybe Christian nationalist light, that folks now latch on to as even further proof that we were founded as a Christian nation. Things like, adding "In God We Trust," under God to the pledge, right? And which we know is a result of, the Cold War, and we need to divide ourselves and distinguish ourselves from those godless communists, right? And so there's things, having Senate chaplains. I mean, that's historically, is ongoing. And so there are a lot of reasons that people would believe and point to America as a Christian nation. But historically, in the founding, I don't believe, and especially because the separation of church and state, that it was intended to be, right, a Christian nation. Yes, the history is complicated. When the early colonies, you have, it was lots of religions, lots of Christian religions, Protestant religions. And it was a crazy time. I mean, you had the Anglicans down in Virginia, right? And you had the Presbyterians north, and, the Methodists are riding around on horses. It's just like, it's chaos, right? And, and I believe in things that I have read historically, that our founding fathers recognized, that people are getting kicked out of colonies because they're not the right religion, or challenging religion, which is, equivalent to challenging kind of the government of the time. I'm thinking of like Anne Hutchinson that got kicked out. And so our government, our founders recognized the inherent divisiveness of this and wanted to say, we need to have freedom of religion, right? We don't need to have tests for office, right? Catholics couldn't even hold office, right? In early America, right? They weren't even deemed Christian. And so all of that to say, I think that there's a very complicated history, both, from the origin of the U.S. and who came, and the different, specifically Protestant groups that came, and that reality, along with the reality of things like Senate chaplains, more contemporary things, right? Of God we trust in our money. And those are taken to be evidence of the U.S. as a Christian nation. And from my understanding, that is not what was intended from the founding documents. And it was freedom for anybody to practice whatever they wanted, whatever type of faith tradition, or no faith tradition at all, right? To be able to do that. So all of that to say, yes, it's a complicated history. That's not my area of expertise, as you pointed out, Josh. But I do understand a lot of the complicated elements that have gone into this, and into people's current belief that this is, America is a Christian nation. You also have folks who believe that we've read or understood the separation of church and state incorrectly all of these years. That, their argument would be that the government should never influence the church, but the church should always influence the government, right? And I've heard, people like Mike Johnson say things like that, and kind of frame the separation of powers in that. And so, yeah, it's a complicated argument. There are two competing narratives right now. And one particular narrative, right, that you typically find not always, typically find on the right, gives legitimacy to also this idea of the covenant relationship with God, with the land, that gives legitimacy to the efforts of spiritual warfare practices to turn the country back to God, specific type of God, right? And so, yeah, all that's concerning whenever it's for me, historically, whether it's, theology, whether it's history, if it's exclusionary, we need to ask why, and we need to really wrestle with that. I tend to err on the side of love and inclusion. And if you're telling me I need to, for religious reasons or political reasons or otherwise, need to exclude a certain group of people, I've got issues with that. And so I think, obviously I'm a person that's biased. So I think how I read history, how I understand the Bible is kind of really the overarching theme for me is love and inclusion. And so I tend to err on the side of that.
I love that. To be human is to be biased. So, man, I could keep talking to you for another hour, but we all have day jobs, and but I have to ask. You're in Louisiana. Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, he's from Louisiana. What's the general vibe? Like, pretty widely liked. Folks are super stoked that you're going to be getting National Guard, policing your streets or something. Like, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, well, I can't speak for all of Louisiana. I mean, Louisiana voter-wise is a pretty red state. New Orleans isn't. And so as we do, tend to, kind of surround ourselves with similar people and similar perspectives, which is really horrible because we all get into our different echo chambers. But, not a fan. Not a fan of somebody who's going to speak of the separation of powers in that way. Not super thrilled about National Guard potentially coming to, unless it's for Mardi Gras. I mean, we need all the help we can get for Mardi Gras. Yeah, but just kind of the everyday.
Those beads aren't going to throw themselves.
No, they are not.
And so, yeah, just not very thrilled with kind of that turn of events. So what you gonna do?
Yeah, I guess you're gonna keep living your life and just keep doing good to the next person, using your voice in the best way you can, honoring God and the people around you. And yeah, I mean,
and writing words. I know you had Paul Jupe on
writing words
before, and when this airs and he sees me on here, I'm going to get a message that says, "Why aren't you writing?" So I'll get back to you very soon.
I was going to actually bring up the Jupe thing, because when I had him on, I was like, is it Jupe or is it Jupe? And there was a little bit of disagreement about how him and his wife pronounces it. But I'll take it on your word that it's Jupe.
Yes, maybe I'm doing it wrong. Yes. Who knows? I feel like I'm doing everything wrong right now. This is the experience of the PhD program.
Yeah, you're good. It's okay. I think I'll just give you that encouragement. I'm not sure if it's true or not, but you're good. You're great. I have to say that to myself, right? Sorry, yes. I'm not the best encourager these days. I actually do think, though, you actually are going to be good, and I
hope so.
There's hope. There's no doubt.
Allegedly. So we'll see. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so here's kind of I'd love to for you to let people know how they can connect with you, how they can follow your work, what's going on, if you want that, or I don't know how much you want people to connect with you or not. So just kind of whatever you want to say here and when your dissertation is coming out, or how they can see that. Just,
So I've got a couple of things coming up in New Orleans. So if you're in New Orleans, reach out. We'll have a conversation with Amanda Tyler and with Robbie Jones and Jay Augustine and others coming up in the next few months. You can find me at karriegaspard.com. and that, if you need to connect with me, there's a way to go ahead and do that. Other than that, I think I try to stay off of Twitter, Blue Sky, Truth Social, all of them. I try to just, Instagram is helpful if you want to look at pictures of my dogs and food.
There you go. I love food as well.
Yeah.
That's something we can all have in common.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Karrie, for coming on the show, spending some time with us. It's been really cool to kind of hear your insight, your heart. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. To our friends and who've joined us, our viewers, guys, thank you for being here. Like, subscribe, do that stuff that hacks the algorithm. We need it. We need you, because we need more sanity out there in the craziness that is our American politics and our culture right now. We just need unity. So we need your help. We love you guys. Thanks for your support. And until next time, keep your conversations not right or left, but up. Hey there, Josh Bertram here, faithful host of the Faithful Politics Podcast. I want to let you know about a compelling new spinoff, the Faith Roundtable, where I'll be interviewing top faith leaders, theologians, and scholars to unpack the pressing issues that are shaping the church in America today. We'll dive into topics like faith in public life, social justice, and how we can engage our communities more effectively. Make sure you don't miss any of our enlightening conversations by subscribing to it on our YouTube channel. Join me at the Faith Roundtable, where deep discussion meets thoughtful insight.